healthcare all the time. But this has been an interesting and somewhat different trend. People usually call and they'll say right away, I want to come in and talk because I'm struggling with a partner, a child, somebody at work, some kind of relationship. Or maybe it's that they're considering a life change, maybe a transition at work. Now, the folks calling recently are struggling with a relationship, but not a relationship with a particular person, but rather their relationship with our current political climate and what it is doing to their soul. So if you've been feeling this same kind of tension and upset inside of yourself, know that you are not alone, and it is not your imagination, because our country is indeed more polarized than ever before. I'm sure that if I stopped now for a moment and Paisley passed the microphone around, you would each have your own personal example of polarization. Examples in which sides are taken and lines are drawn and people stop listening. And we could spend the rest of our morning telling these stories of disconnection and heartbreak and animosity and fear. This pattern of polarization is so ingrained in our public process and increasing so in our relationships that it's hard to avoid. Now recently, the Pew Research Center released their findings that over the past 25 years, Americans taken as one big whole. If you look at us just all together, we haven't changed all that much. But the values, they say, of the two dominant political parties have. Years ago, when they started their research, people who identified with the two parties answered questions about immigration and the environment pretty much the same way. Today, you could use those questions as a litmus test for party affiliation. We have these broader differences now. In 1987, 93% of Democrats, 86% of Republicans said there needs to be stricter laws and regulations to protect the environment. Pretty similar. Today, 93% of Democrats still feel the same way, but 47% of Republicans agree. Now, the percentage of Democrats today versus then who say they support efforts to improve the positions of minorities, even if it may mean preferential treatment, is actually up almost 20 percentage points. What the Pew Research Center says is that the parties have gone through what could be called a purification process, making them smaller and more ideological than ever. And according to those who refuse to claim any labels, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, according to those, the nuns, or the unaffiliated, the political life of the nation has degenerated into such a polarized partisan battleground that the extremes of both left and right dominate the scene. There is no center that holds anymore, and the country, they say, is ungovernable. Our national discourse, as you know, if your power hasn't gone out during all of the debates, you know that it has become one of open animosity. It seems like there's no censoring anymore. There's no filter. The presidential debates from the very beginning devolved time and again into just yelling matches where moderators would interrupt candidates to ask them to stop because no one could hear or understand anything that anyone was saying. And unfortunately, it's only gotten worse. Now, one of the most concerning pieces for me that I've heard in these conversations with folks who've come in to talk is a dangerous leap that's being made in our thinking regarding those who hold the differing viewpoints or beliefs. Not only are their positions on policy issues ridiculous, but they are bad people. And they and their beliefs are ridiculous, And there has to be something inherently wrong with this person if this is what they truly believe. So we no longer consider the position objectionable. We consider the person intolerable, obnoxious, unacceptable. These are the politics, Parker Palmer says, of the brokenhearted. When all our talk about politics is partisan and polarizing, we loosen or sever the human connections on which empathy, accountability, and democracy itself depend. So why does this matter? How is it harmful? If you look at the political landscape, you've got these debates, if you can use that word, that turn into ugly name-calling, and the only reason people watch is to be entertained or horrified. We're not watching really to have our perspectives informed or broadened. We're not really learning anything new. We're tuning in to see the latest installment in a circus. So then there's these rallies filled with hateful speech that lead to violence. Then there's the fact that we're losing trust in those elected to govern. We're reaching a level of cynicism and suspicion that's detrimental for all of us. And it seeps into our civil society, in our relationships with family and friends. Now, there's the rather calm and unobtrusive unfriending of someone on Facebook, because you just don't want to see the political posts anymore. All the way to no longer calling family or friends because you don't want to hear it. Or the heated arguments over the dinner table that cause ongoing strife. Does it have to be this way? We know this great democratic experiment in this country is dependent upon our engagement with one another on matters that are important to all of us. So I thought about this. Does it have to be this way? And I found some ideas from two very different sources. Abraham Lincoln and a colony of ants. Maybe never put together before. We'll start with the ants. Now, the Harvard expert on ants, Edward O. Wilson, published a book that's called On Human Nature. Now, in that book, he says that out in fields, when ant colonies grow so large that there isn't enough food to feed all of them, they go to war with nearby ant colonies. The war continues until so many ants die that there's enough food left to feed the remaining ants. Wilson suggests that like ants, human beings form colonies. For example, we're all in a colony called the United States, a sub-colony called Wisconsin. You all live in the sub-colony of Fond du Lac, and this sub-colony of Open Circle. And perhaps, he says, the most important sub-colony for all of us, our family. He says that like the ants, we fight when we believe that the resources necessary for our colony's survival are threatened. So when it comes to governmental policies, we don't ask, what's in it for me? We ask, what's in it for my group, my tribe, my colony? So justifications people give for acts of aggression, such as religious differences or political differences, are, in Wilson's view, a veneer that covers the real reason, the perceived fear of death of the colony due to scarce resources. Wilson would argue that when humans believe that we have enough resources, we speak about the inherent worth and dignity of all people. However, when we believe that we're running out of the resources necessary for our survival, phrases such as, all people are created equal, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations become less important and are replaced with talk about personal responsibility and fending for yourself. In times of perceived scarcity, we focus on supporting our tribe, our group, and our colony. Now, I'll add in here, I had a real-life example of this on Thursday. Sam's class, my fourth grader, went to Pope Farm Park to learn about Native American survival techniques. They learned about housing, food growth, food storage, weapons and technology, cooking, and then they became a clan. We were the acorns. There was a bean, there was a corn, and there was a wheat. Well, 3 of the clans, as you would go around and you would meet, 3 of the clans all traded beads with each other for friendship. And we talked about, why do we need friends to survive the coming winter? And then at the end, when we went through, do we have shelter, do we have food, do we have weapons? If we had a hole, we said, but we have a friend. And we can go to that clan. And so we were okay. The acorns made it through the winter. One clan, the corn, decided amongst themselves they would friend no one. So when another clan approached, they traded beans, or they traded corn, or they traded wood for fire, or they traded deer meat. They would not friend anyone. So when they got back to their little grouping and talked through, what do we have? Now, and the kids, they're 4th graders. They thought they were 9 and 10-year-old boys mostly, and they thought this was really funny to say, we're on our own. We don't need any friends. When their leader said, do we have shelter? Do we have food? They had a hole. And so the leader said to them, what happens to us? And all of them, 2-1, said, we died. The Corn Clan did not make it through the winter. And they were really quiet on the bus ride home. And his teacher sent an email last night and said, for Thursday and Friday, and she expects longer, they have had a lesson every day where someone has mentioned, why did that happen to the Corn Clan? But when they got into their clan, their instinct was to look out for our own and to not think about anybody else. And what they realized when they got to the end, they didn't make it through the winter. So now in contrast to that mindset, let's look at Abraham Lincoln. Now there's a great book called Lincoln's Melancholy, which that's not an uplifting title, is it? Lincoln's Melancholy. Joshua Schenck wrote this book, and he discusses Lincoln's journey with depression and how his need to preserve his life by embracing and integrating his own despair and his joy made him uniquely qualified to help America preserve the Union. Because he knew sorrow and delight intimately, knew them as inseparable elements of being human, he refused to split North and South into good guys and bad guys, a split that might have taken us to national destruction. Instead, in his second inaugural address, March 4th, 1865, a month before the end of the Civil War, Lincoln appealed for malice toward none and charity for all, animated by what one writer called an awe-inspiring sense of love for all who bore the brunt of battle. In his appeal to a deeply divided America, Lincoln pointed out an essential fact of our life together. If we are to survive and thrive, if we're going to make it through the winter, we must hold the divisions and contradictions with compassion, lest we lose our democracy. So how do we do this? How do we decrease the polarization? Decreasing polarization requires an ability, if we can stand it, to see the situation as the other side sees it. Or as Lincoln might tell us, we have to stop seeing good guys and bad guys. If we want to influence another person, it helps enormously to understand their point of view, to feel the emotional force with which they believe it. It does go against our evolutionary programming. It encourages us to focus on the facts that support our point of view and demonize the people whom we disagree. That's our evolution. But one thing we can do to counteract that is increase the number of personal relationships that we have with people of different perspectives and make an effort to truly Listen. Not debate. Listen. Establish good human relationships with people. Be curious about their positions and why they hold them. What do they hold sacred? This makes it harder to demonize someone else when they strongly hold a belief antithetical to everything you stand for. This is tough work. I cannot do it with my own parents. They were here last week, and every time the conversation went one way, I took it another. So there may be people in your life that you just say, can't do it. Not for me, it's my parents. But I do have a cousin whom I adore, who's married to a wonderful man, great husband, he's a great dad, who unfortunately, in my view, is completely out of his mind when it comes to politics. He votes for people who, I think are personally destroying our country. He makes remarks to try and start political arguments because he's well aware that our views couldn't be further apart. Do you all have one of those people who they just see it coming? So when I was there last Christmas, I tried something different. I tried to find what we have in common. Not engaging in the discourse that he was trying to start that would just lead to disagreement, debate, but finding what it is that we share. We both love our families, we love our kids, we want to give them a world to grow up in where they feel that they can have a real future. So instead of engaging in the who's the best candidate for president conversation that was not going to end well, I said, sounds like you're pretty frustrated with the whole process. And he said that he was. And I said, I am too. I feel like I don't have any good options, an option that I can wholeheartedly feel good about. And he said that was the way he was feeling as well. And then I went out on a limb and I said, you know what? I don't sleep at night because it scares the heck out of me and I'm worried about the kids. And he said, I completely agree. How do we fix this mess? And then we had this open, honest, heart-rending conversation about the world we want to give to our kids and what it would take to get there. That was one moment. It never happened again for me. It didn't happen last week with my parents. Sometimes all of our efforts to decrease polarization are going to fail because others are convinced that we're threatening their survival. Nothing we can do can change their perception, but somebody's got to try. There are ways to increase this movement toward depolarization. The conversation never would have happened without that foundational understanding of we're all in this together. Despite our illusion of independence, we are profoundly interdependent. That includes everybody, regardless of political ideology. We got to stop with this binary thinking. There's no good guys, there's no bad guys, there's no I'm right and you're wrong. There isn't one truth with everything else being completely false. Can we get to a place where we value otherness? Our differences can remind us of that ancient and difficult tradition of hospitality where we open our hearts to the stranger with the understanding that there's much that we can learn as well. Become comfortable with doubt. Václav Havel famously said that he'd rather have a beer with someone who's searching for the truth than with the guy who already found it. Now, Havel was a man of firm convictions. He started a revolution based on his convictions. He's not talking about being passive, giving up your voice, ignoring your beliefs. Not what he's saying at all. He's advocating against a certitude that breeds contempt for one's opponents and transforms the desire for authentic engagement into a need to lecture and point out the errors of their ways. In today's polarized environment, doubt is seen as a weakness, but the opposite is true. Doubt often supports true convictions based on realistic foundations and gives us the ability to empathize and connect. And with that, if we can hold some doubt, we can find the ability to hold tension in life-giving ways. Our lives are filled with contradictions, from the gap between our aspirations and our behavior, to observations and insights we just can't abide because they run counter to our convictions. If we fail to hold this creatively, the contradictions can shut us down and take us out of the action altogether. But when we allow the tension to expand our hearts with some curiosity and some doubt, they can open us to new understandings of ourselves and the world, enhancing our lives and allowing us to enhance the lives of others. We're imperfect beings who inhabit an imperfect and damaged world, and the genius of the human heart lies in its capacity to use the tension to generate insight and energy and new life. A. Powell Davies, who was the minister of All Souls Unitarian in Washington, D.C. from 1945 to 1957, once wrote these words: "I become more and more certain as the years go by that wherever friendship is destroyed, or homes are broken, or precious ties are severed, there is a failure of imagination. Someone is too intent on justifying himself or herself, never venturing out to imagine the way things seem to the other person. Imagination is shut off and sympathy dies. If we know what it is that makes other people speak or act as they do, if we knew it vividly by carefully imagining all that may lie behind it, we might not quarrel. We might understand. Often we could heal the wounds. But even where that is not possible, and of course we have to admit it is not always possible, even where fuller understanding only leaves us rather sad and helpless, it would still give us the power to be kind, to act, yes, but still to be kind, to go on being kind. In a world being torn apart by hatred and fear, may we be brave enough to make honest human connections, remembering that we're all in this together. Doubt, wonder, question, hold the tension, allow it to open your heart. Speak your truth with love and compassion, and go on being kind. Again and again, go on being kind." It is like 5 after 11, and I just went on and on and on.